So the first thing you did was draw a distinction between rationalism and empiricism. And you associated Dawkins more with rationalism and yourself more with empiricism.
Yes, not entirely, but yeah.
No, fair enough, just as example. And you did that in an attempt to also describe the effect or influence or consequence or reason for your interest in drama, or for the fact that drama grips you. So I want to start with the distinction between between empiricism and rationalism, so everyone listening understands. So walk us through that first.
Well, empiricism is an intellectual tradition of using experience or trial and error or experiment to prove or disprove or to investigate an idea. So if you have an idea, I mean, a perfect example is in the 18th and 19th century, a lot of women were dying of childbirth, appalling deaths, what we would now call septicemia. The babies and the mothers were dying, and nobody knew why, because there was no germ theory. Nobody had an idea that there were these tiny things that could infect our systems. So people tried to reason, and they said, well, maybe it's the smell because it's a bad smell around. There was a miasma theory. And other people just said it was God, or other people said that it was some moral quality on the part of the women. But a man called Semmelweis in Hungary, Ignaz Semmelweis, tried lots of different experiments. He chose a certain number of people to do different things on what we now call cohort testing, or not quite random double-blind testing, such as used as in medicine to prove the efficacy of something. But eventually, he got a group of medical students who were attending on these births to wash their hands before doing it. It was an almost random thing to do, and suddenly the death rate dropped. I mean, absolutely plummeted.
And the reward for Semmelweis?
He was sent to a madhouse. Because nobody believed
where he died, I
because
believe.
The rationalists said there's no reason that could be right. But a true empiricist would say it almost doesn't matter what the reason is. The fact is it's repeatable and verifiable. And even not understanding, because it took later till Koch and Pasteur and microscopes could show what the process was. He actually did end up in a, and he's a hero man. I actually went to Budapest to go to the Ignaz Semmelweis Museum in Buda, just to sort of pay homage to this remarkable man. And I mean, it's a bit unfair on the doctors. They had no reason to know, if you like, but that's the point. They had no reason to know. An example we all deal with of empiricism, which can be very annoying, is in insurance. What's called actuarial tables, or actuaries, are people in insurance companies who look at the statistics. And if they discovered that when your name is Jordan, you are 10% more likely to have a car crash, you would pay 10% more of premium on your insurance. And it's no good you saying, but why? They would just say, those are the odds. That's the empirical truth. That's the epidemiology of accidents, if you like, is that people called Jordan, or more famously, of course, actors pay more. And you can then try and look for a reason. And that's a very valuable thing to do. Of course, we all want to know the reason. But sometimes I think there is a beauty in testing and looking and seeing and trying things out and experimenting. It's not to discard reason. The two go together in terms of finding out the truth.
So how do you associate that with your interest in literature and your clear recognition that the dramatic end of existence is valuable?
Well, I suppose in an obvious way, all literature people, literature snobs, I might say, will look at politics. I mean, all through my life, I've looked at people like, I don't know, Margaret Thatcher, or indeed, on the other side, Gordon Brown, and thought, if only they read Shakespeare. Why do people read books of political philosophy and books on this being a good idea, on, how parliamentary history, without actually reading about how humans behave and seeing how evil and good are played out in drama? Because I think not just literature, but ceremony and ritual are extremely important in understanding everything. And you don't have to be religious to to believe in ritual. I love liturgy. I love church liturgy. I'm absolutely passionate about hymns and psalms and the Eucharist and the language of it. You know, the outward and visible sign of an inward and visible grace is one of the most beautiful phrases I think ever written in the book of the Eucharist of the Episcopalian Church, as Americans call it, or the Anglican Church as we call it. And there are magnificent shortcuts available if you look at ceremony and the dramatization of human issues, rather than attempting to abstract some essence from them, some truth that you can say that is applicable to all. It's, in a sense, we're all children who have to be shown puppets before we understand. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah. I've stopped. Sorry.
No. Well, it's just stopped and made me think.
As a spouse, a parent, or a leader, people count on you. But if you're constantly tired, unfocused, and just not feeling like yourself, how can you show up the way they need you to? That's where Merrick Health comes in. Merrick is a premier health optimization platform that uses comprehensive lab work, not guesswork, to uncover what's really going on in your body. Hormones, thyroid inflammation, nutrient levels, the markers that matter. Their expert clinical teams build a personalized, research-backed plan just for you, whether it's lifestyle changes, supplements, or prescription treatments. When you know what's going on inside, you can leave with clarity, show up with energy, and stay sharp for your family, your team, and yourself. Head over to merrickhealth.com and use code Peterson for 10% off to join their guided optimization program with your personal medical team. That's merrickhealth.com, code Peterson. Stop guessing, start leading, and start with Merrick Health.
The reason I got interested in religious thinking, I went down the pathway that you're describing. I mean, that's why I got interested in religious thinking, because from a psychological perspective, I mean, the first thing that I realized, and I believe this is what you just pointed out, is that there are truths embedded in fiction, for example, or in spectacle, ritual, drama. And, well, then you ask, well, what is it? Those are attractive and they're entertaining and they automatically engage our interest. But way more than that, they're also that which culture centers itself around. Yeah. Greek tragedy, for example, which seemed to be integrally associated with the Eleusinian Greek mysteries, something that we know very little about, unfortunately. But for me, and I was influenced by Carl Jung in this mode of thinking, culture is nested inside a narrative structure by necessity. I even believe that science is nested inside a narrative structure, because the narrative structure is what makes the science practically applicable and useful.
Yes. What else is the standard model, but another way of saying a narrative structure? The standard model is just that, and that is the basis of physics today, isn't it? It's a story.
Well, the idea that we have that science is a useful endeavor, the fact that we're looking to the material world for redemption, that's all part of a narrative. And I was absolutely staggered by Jung's analysis of the emergence of science out of alchemy. And his notion was that the alchemical tradition was a 2,000-year-old dream, a narrative dream, a counterposition to Christianity with its emphasis on abstracted spirituality, suggesting that what we lacked could be found in the depths of the material world. And that was, and yes. So there was this motivational dream that if we paid enough attention to the transformations of matter, we could find that which would confer upon us eternal life, infinite health, and wealth. And Jung's point was, well, until that dream was in place, there would be no motivation to undertake the process of the painstaking analysis of the material world that didn't produce any immediate gratification. And it took thousands of years for that idea to assemble itself with enough force so that we could start to have scientists. So the narrative was operative thousands of years before the technical process was instituted, and it laid the groundwork for it. And I found that highly credible. And
maybe also took that time for the brain of humans, if you believe Julian Jaynes, and I kind of do in a metaphorical way. I don't know if you know his book.
Yes, I do.
I'm sure you do, yeah. That maybe, our brains weren't even capable of processing in that way around the time of between language and writing, that sort of time. We were finding ways of describing the world. To the Egyptian, I believe I'm right in saying this is the derivation, el-chemet, the magic, became alchemy, which then became chemistry, and it became drilled down into an investigation. But first, you had to believe that there was a chemet, there was a magic inside everything, inside substance, to which we could be tuned.
Yes, right, a redemptive magic.
Yes, if you like. And this is not to repudiate science and numbers, and a very good friend of mine who was a priest said, physics is a theology that makes machines work, and there's some sort of truth in that. And I love, for example, the story. I tell it in a footnote in Mythos, but it's very, very early on in Greek mythology, when the primal entities, the primal deities are Uranos, the sky, or Uranus, as children we love to call him, and Gaia, the earth, who mate. The sky and the earth mate is a common theme in what they call a mytheme in lots of different myths, as you can imagine. The sky and the earth mate, and they produce whatever is in between, the zone which we inhabit between sky and earth. And that next generation are called the Titans, of course. But and there's the famous story of the birth of Zeus. His father, the Titan, eats all his children, and the mother, Rhea, is determined that the last child, Zeus, shouldn't be eaten. So she goes and gets a rock from close by where she lives on Mount Orthrus, and she covers it in swaddling and hides it under her legs, and then makes the noise of childbirth. And Kronos, the Titan, comes, thinks it's a new baby, swallows it whole, and the actual baby is then born on Crete and becomes Zeus, the leader of the next generation of gods. But the stone she takes is from Magnesium in Greece, which is near Thessaly. And it's a stone that the Greeks had noticed had a very extraordinary property, which is the most interesting property that any object can have on Earth, and is very rare, and that it can attract things remotely from a distance, that without there being a physical force connecting them, apparently, a piece of fluff or paper could fly towards this stone from Magnesium. And so stones that have this property are named after that part of the world. They're called magnetites, and from magnetites we get magnets. And the story of magnets and how magnets were then joined by Thomson and Faraday and others to make and Maxwell to make the electromotive force that allows you and me to talk the way we do, and to use that action at a distance, which science is brilliant at turning into extraordinary magical machines. The Greek for at a distance is tele, so it's telecommunication, telephone, television, and teleporting, anything that goes from one distant, telegrams and and so on, telegraphs. And that is and gravity is the same thing. Something moves and there's nothing between it. And it makes us thrill. And science can do that. And what we've never found a way to do is, or at least what we try to find a way, is to do the same with our fellow people. But our fellow people are, the world is surprisingly stable. There's magnets around the place, and there's gold and there's stuff, and you dig it up and you can do terrible damage to it, as we have. But we have moved from small groups to clans to tribes to nations to this strange myth of a nation and so on. And the individuals within it are much less controllable than the objects around us. And yet we can control those objects so superbly that it gives us an idea that we have a special place and a special power. And it's, I suppose, really what we want to do is to reconnect ourselves to the same motive forces that are thrilling, like magnetism and electricity, that exist in also all throughout nature that we look at. You know, which of us can't honestly almost sob with joy when spring happens and you see that once again these leaves are being pushed out of dead branches and blossoms there and insects are flying towards them. There's this fantastic process going on, and somehow we've allowed ourselves to feel outside it as if we are special. We've given ourselves a godlike status, which is very dangerous, I think, and very foolish. And the more I look back, the more confidence I have in looking forward. I suppose that's one of the other reasons I love myth so much.
So, okay. So, all right. So, you described yourself as an empiricist, and then you started to talk about the attraction that the mythological and narrative world has for you, and some of the reasons for that. And then, but you also differentiated between you and Dawkins to some degree. And so, well, I'm curious about why.
Oh, I mean, I'm as I said, I can't speak for him, but you used the word rationalist,
and I understand
originally,
that.
and I don't have any particularly points of disagreement with him. I'm really fond of him. He's a friend, and I only feel sorry sometimes that, and this is a cheap point. It's, you know, well, most of us are a bit fed up with this attitude that it's all about presentation. And I could argue that Richard's presentation, his passion is real. His love of science is real. His love of the joy and the wonder of discovery is real. He's written books on wonder, which is a huge and marvelous and much underexplored human quality.
And a primary religious instinct.
Yes, and yet science has shown us, and it really just can't be contested, that we are part of a continuum of life. DNA demonstrates this. The DNA we share, not just with our close ape-like and other mammals, but also with plants and flowers that also have DNA. And as we know, so do viruses. And yet, or RNA, and yet, I think it's fair to say that blackbirds don't look at the sunset and go, my God, that's so beautiful. Did you see that? I want to paint it. I want to remember it. How is it? You know, this sense of literally of marveling. It's the only world we know. When we're born, we don't think, of course, there are 70,000 other globes with much better sunsets. This is the only thing we've ever seen, and yet it staggers us. It surprises us. We're surprised by what is the case, to use the phrase that Wittgenstein loved. You know, the case is everything around us. And we don't know another one. And yet we go, wow. Why should we go wow at what is absolutely ordinary? There must be a reason, I suspect, that we are astonished by the everyday, by the fact of what we see when we look out of the window or when we go for a walk. We're astonished by buds and grass and rabbits and sky and clouds. And these things are
But we're astonished. Yeah. We're astonished by what we want to imitate.
Yeah.
That's and I've thought about that idea for a long time. It's not a casual response to your question.
Yeah.
Well, the sun is a hero. The sun is the hero that fights the darkness at night and rises anew in the morning. The sun is associated with consciousness.
Yeah.
And we have to imitate the hero. Yeah. And we see what we have to imitate everywhere. And it reduces us to a state of awe. And awe is an invitation to imitate. And imagine, so you see what you are not yet, but what you could be. Mm. And you need to see that because you need to turn into what you could be, because what you are is not sufficient to redeem you.
Well, I see that from a Jungian point of view, but and a Joseph Campbell sort of way too. But in terms of the way myths and then religions developed, the idea of imitating these symbols of complete power and creation, like the sun, whether it's Ra or whether it's Apollo or any other deity or sense of solar greatness, you are supposed to supplicate or sacrifice to or acknowledge your weakness to, but not
we could look at sacrifice. Look at sacrifice. That's a great inward point. So I ask my students, especially the children of first-generation immigrants, What did your parents sacrifice to put you here? And they can answer that instantly. And sacrifice, like we look at ancient sacrifice and we think about it as something primordial or even detestable, especially in its more extreme forms, and no wonder. But we had to act out sacrifice before we could psychologize it and understand it. And what we learned, and this is absolutely crucial, this issue of sacrifice, what we learned was that if we gave up something that we valued in the present, and so that could be a false idol, that's one way of thinking about it. If we gave up something in the present that we valued, the future would improve. We learned that we could bargain with reality itself by sacrificing counterproductive values to move ahead. And so we acted that out long before we could make it into a psychological truism. And so there is that supplication element, but it's also the case that you should be prostrate in some sense in front of what's ultimately ideal, because otherwise you don't have the proper humility.
Yes, I mean, I see what you're saying. It makes rational sense, but then the empiricist in me says, well, okay, I'm the mother of some of those children in Mexico who are being slaughtered to the gods in order to make the harvest better. And lo and behold, it doesn't work. Because there is no causal relation between sacrificing children on a pyramid in Texaquatl and the harvest improving. In fact, there may well be an earthquake the next day and more people die. That very often did happen in whole civilizations. Mayan and Mexican and others disappeared. And the more they were threatened, the more they sacrificed, and the less use it was. So there was no... It may have had a psychological purpose that I don't know. I mean, it seems to me the psychology of sacrificing your children or even your very rare cattle upon which you may depend for a year to eat to gods who will apparently placate you by making a better harvest or not send a tidal wave this year that will destroy the port and all the other things that our ancestors found in the contingent world in which an unstable world in which they lived. So I can understand why a 19th century figure like Fraser or in the Golden Bough or like Mary McCarthy or Jung or Joseph Campbell can make wonderful myths out of myths. They're telling a story about stories and telling us what they mean. Well, I don't refute it. I repudiate it. I allow myself to believe, no, actually, yes, it's all very well, and you can build a very nice theory about what these myths mean and who these heroes are and what these quests are and how there are only 7 stories and yes, but again, the stand-up comedian type empiricist in me says, okay, so I'm a small Roman person under those circumstances, and what is this really meaning to me? I'm sorry, no. I've got, as Wordsworth put it, it's getting and spending and doing and having children and looking and hoping life gets better and enjoying life with my friends. But to erect it into a spiritual language and a theatre of human meaning is delightful. But I think we have to recognize that it's a game to some extent. It may indeed be true. I mean, I'm not saying this to demolish your argument, but I'm saying it's yes, but in terms of sacrifice.
The buts are important.
Yeah.
The buts are important. And the skepticism is necessary because you don't want to leave anything standing except that which can't survive the onslaught.
Yes.
And there's no doubt that the sacrificial idea can go dreadfully wrong. And but I would say that that's in the nature of the attempt, because it's obviously the case that sometimes you make sacrifices towards a certain end, which is clearly an attempt to bargain with the future as if it's something that can be bargained with.
Yes, but
sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
And later, after that, the cultures of sacrifice around the world, came a new system where it was the gods who sacrificed themselves, which is like the Christian myth or many of the dying and reborn kings in various myths that James Fraser in particular wrote about. And there Christ ransomed himself, as it was. So suddenly it's It's as if humans said, this sacrifice is getting us nowhere. If God really loves us, he would sacrifice himself or herself for us. And that is one of the meanings of the incarnation and the Christian story, is it not? And it's not unique in any way. There are many other stories of divine figures being sacrificed to save the society in which they make themselves flesh.